Welcome to another episode of The Wireless Way. I'm your host, Chris Whitaker. And as always, so grateful that you're here. I know there's a lot going on in your life. So, hey, man, I'm glad you're here. And I'm also equally grateful for Matthew Schneider. He's the founder and CEO of Building Inc. He's our guest today. He's a real estate data company leader focused on valuation, compliance, digital twins, and tokenization. All new topics to The Wireless Way. So I'm really excited to have his take on all of that. His expertise combines the built environment, financial markets, and digital infrastructure. Matthew has been a researcher and a practitioner in the space since 2020 as a frequent speaker at international technology and real estate conferences. He also serves on the board of directors of Fibri, supporting global collaboration and standards in blockchain enabled real estate. I've talked about blockchain from the IoT perspective. So here's another angle on it we're going to hear more about. So welcome, Matthew. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Gosh, man. No, I'm glad we were able to align our schedules. By the way, that's probably my favorite word. Fantastic. It's a powerful word. Do you like it? Do you use that often?
I have to admit, I do. Sometimes I say awesome, fantastic, splendid, but we were talking before the show, and I think that this is actually an opportunity to feel fantastic. All the topics you want to go over and all the stuff I'm going to be talking about and probably blabbering a little bit. It's like I'm going to try not to give a lecture on these topics, but I get pretty excited. So, Chris, at any time, feel free to cut me off and we can dive into some keyword that I bring up.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah. And that is my favorite word. And I do use it a lot. And I appreciate you saying that because as we were sharing earlier, I know you're a podcaster. Love to hear more about that in a moment. But yeah, sometimes you don't want to interrupt your guest. But yeah, if you're going on like a 5-minute tangent with you, I may have to say, hey, can we go back to something? Yeah, that's funny. So first question I always have, what's not in the bio? How did you get here? Tell us more about Matthew.
I started out as a derivatives trader. So I had what they call an
Okay, wait a minute. What is
independent
that?
think options in the stock market. So as I was looking not at Tesla stock itself or Apple, but speculating on what moves Apple stock or Tesla would make. And they call those options contracts or derivatives. Was technically an independent prop desk, i.e., I opened up my own brokerage account and just put my own money in. But the former sounds a little bit more professional. I was doing all sorts of technical and then fundamental analysis of these companies, of the markets, and figuring out how they move, where the buyers were sitting. To this day, I still do a little bit of that. Most of the time, I'm just on the sidelines watching different companies or cryptocurrencies or futures, keeping tabs on everything. But this was my first major exposure to entrepreneurship. Now, before that, I had published a book, and people will call that entrepreneurship. I had done some music, but this was a serious undertaking. It was actually throwing me into the weeds and trying to understand big industries. I had started a group with some friends inspecting different companies on the market and then communicating our analysis to other people. We had monetized that. That's why I think that this is really the major start of my entrepreneurial journey. I did not do that for very long because it's stressful. And if you're not careful about your risk, you end up losing more than you make, and then you just can't go on. So I shifted out of that and I got into real estate. This was 2019, 2020. And someone I knew was investing in real estate as an LP into these deals. He was talking about the big ticket size and how that was keeping friends and family out from participating in these same deals that were actually making them a lot of money. So he and I started talking. We said, why don't we try to come up with an alternative way for people to invest in real estate, make it more democratized, hopefully make something more streamlined so that we can make a business model out of it. We put our money where our mouths were, developed a platform. We used some new technology that had some headlines at the time, right? People were talking about blockchain and tokenization as far back as 2016. You saw these case studies and white papers that were coming out. We thought that we'd dip our toes in as well. Now, with anything, when you first learn about a new technology, you don't quite grasp what it is, how it should be applied. We're doing our research, but with bleeding edge technology, it's always evolving. So you have a fair idea of what it is, but you don't have all the weaknesses. You don't quite understand the downstream effects, the ripple effects that it has, or the type of digital infrastructure required for it to be successful. Like we could tie this back to, if you're the wireless guy, we could tie it back to IoT. You could say, hey, look, I have this fantastic new sensor that I've installed in the common area of this building. It's like, cool. What's it connected to? I haven't thought about that. Where are you putting the data? I'm not sure. Who can collect, who can look at the data? I don't know. But the sensor's there, right? So that's, at least we have the sensor. That makes us pretty bleeding edge.
Check the box.
Right, right. What eventually happened is we sunsetted the company. I decided to stay in the industry, which is prop tech, data, blockchain, AI, trying to figure out what are more reasonable, practical use cases for this technology that is scalable, that is solving a hair on fire issue in the industry. Eventually, I came around to looking at real estate data and identifying a way that we can make real estate data verifiable. In other words, real estate right now is so full of rework, re-verification, mistrusting other people, not having access to information, and you can bloat deals. You take them from what really should be transacted in a couple days to something that could take weeks or months. You're constantly reviewing the same information. Appraisals are drawn out. They're expensive. Investing into properties. All of this is on a common denominator, which is that we might not have the data for our properties. If we do have the data, we're not sure if it's complete, if it's telling us the full picture. We don't always know who gave us the data or how long it's been sitting there. So what I recognized in that pivot, which really took place almost 2 years now, is that if I talk about blockchain technology, this is a really good use case for it, that I can verify data. And what that offers is something that I've coined as data continuity, which is that if I collect data 10 years ago, it's still useful to me today and still useful to all my stakeholders, and it will be 10 years from now. And this is really transformational for the industry because the assets, the properties themselves were there 10 years ago, they're here today, and they'll be here in 20 years. But what do we know about the properties? That gets lost along the way. And so now you have a property that we don't know anything about. We're not really sure if we can keep it going. How's it been maintained? What's the risk involved? What's the tech? That's not so good. So when you let the data live alongside the physical asset, you start to treat data as its own asset. That's huge. That's critical. It's valuable. And in the age of the internet, it unlocks a whole world of possibilities. So that's sort of my story of how I came to recognize data as a key player in real estate or the built environment, even though it's so overlooked, and then how to turn that into something valuable as well.
And it's all commercial real estate, right? Or in any residential?
Really, it's applicable across all asset classes. For a single family house, a residential property, think of it like a Carfax. What if a house came with a Carfax? Now, sometimes they come with some receipts and some paperwork, but you still have questions. You're
Home
still going to get,
inspections.
yeah, right. Lots of second opinions, add in some discounts. And the other thing is, even if you have all that, the warmth of the market is probably going to determine what it sells at. For commercial properties, because they're more regulated, they're sitting on balance sheets, there's less interpretation of valuations. You actually need that data present. It has to fit into some sort of calculator that bankers are going to be doing, that appraisers are going to be doing. So it's certainly applicable for real estate. There's use case or residential real estate. There's use cases there. But it's huge when it's a $100 million property or when it's a portfolio worth $1 billion. Then it's really unlocked. The
Yeah.
potential is.
Reminds me of Dr. Evil and the Austin Powers. I need the info. I need the info. Throw me your freaking bone here. I need the info. The data. You need the data. I mean, having that data, educated decisions are much better than just a hunch or a gut feeling, I guess. To kind of go back to your bio a little bit, I heard you mention music. I mean, are you a musician or did you produce music or how did
I
you
am.
yeah,
Yeah,
music. What does that mean
I've
to
been
you?
a pianist for a long time, a little bit of guitar here or there. Tried to sing at one point, definitely don't have the pipes. And then I took those skills, and started producing, releasing some music. It actually only recently got pulled down from Spotify because I decided not to renew my subscription with the distributor. But I put out all sorts of stuff. I mean, it wasn't like phenomenal. I wasn't going down in the history books, but it was fun.
You enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I still play here or there. I've got a very out of tune baby grand piano. It's just a
Nice.
nice pastime. And of all the pastimes you could have, this is one that keeps your brain sharp.
Oh yeah. Well, it's, everyone likes to have that one friend that can, just sit down and start playing the piano and, entertain the party, I guess. Yeah. Every time I'm in public, occasionally you see those, some cities have the pianos sitting out in the street
Hmm.
or at the airport. And of course, this, we all have seen the Instagram reels where the random guy just sits down and starts killing out some kind of, piece of the classics. You ever done that? You played out in public for
I've
strangers?
I have not played for
Would you?
strangers. Could potentially. I don't have too much memorized. If I had sheet music with me, maybe I could do it. I've only
Okay.
played in a band once. Most of my stuff is just solo performance or playing because I need something to do.
Well, you're probably pretty busy now, right? I mean, do you have much spare time?
Not too much. Not too much. And even in my spare time, I have secondary projects that I'm working on. Like, just an example, I do put my money where my mouth is when it comes to digitizing things. We have thousands of family photos, both sides of the family dating back at least, well, some of these are 150 years old, the pictures that we have. And so I've been scanning everything. I have been uploading it, indexing it, and then also restoring a lot of the pictures so that, I
Great.
mean, 150 years worth of history is in my hands, and I want to make sure that 150 years from now, people still have access to these documents. It's the same principle with a building. Like, hey, what's the history here? What do we know
Yeah.
about it? And
Yeah.
what can we preserve for generations to come? Same thing here. At one point, my great 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 grandparents were the same age as me, and they took a photograph. They didn't know it was going to end up in my hands. So, like, what power do I have years from now when the same thing happens?
That's pretty amazing. That's a great idea. So speaking of building, and buildings, let's pivot back to that. I mean, so why do companies come to you? What are you doing for businesses? Why are they doing business with you?
Well, I've recently been reassembling our tagline. I was juggling this question all the time because there's a lot of different use cases. It's everywhere. I could say that it's used for everything. But if I really wanted to consolidate what the big trend is, what the big problem I'm solving, we're helping real estate prepare for digital markets. There's no escaping digital markets. You're handling digital transactions, digital investments, and all sorts of digital instruments that are being created, or what they call internet capital markets, where there's new collateralization and securitization. These are all banking terms for the most part, or securities. So, given that that's the future, and that's going to make or break real estate developers and asset managers, how do we help them take the leap from paper files or outdated legacy systems to this online age? And how do they do that correctly? Because the answer is actually not get as much data as you can. Being data rich is one characteristic, but what about having trustworthy data? What about machine readable data? What about data that can be reused across stakeholders? Because if I give you 1,000,000 data points and you're not really sure, you do your review, you get in third parties, you've got data scientists on the job, we spend $100,000 fixing that. And then 12 months later, the data has holes in it, like moths are eating at it. You're going to go through the same process again. Okay, now we're $200,000 in the hole, taking care of all the data that you gave me. That's a big issue. So what we say is, how do we help these real estate developers and asset managers first digitize, but then also build trust into their data, build trust across their stakeholders, build trust across their portfolio? And what's the benefit of that? How much money do we save when we don't have to comb over information again? How much money can we gain when our properties are valued fairly or at premium because they're rich with verified information? That's confidence. That's less risk. That's greater transparency. That's the ease of transacting now and years from now, or how quickly I can collateralize an asset. And so you see this downstream effect when we're helping the real estate get ready for digital markets. There's a couple different examples that I could give. I mean, first, we install a framework for these companies. We say, based off of your property phase and the categories of data, here's what we're looking for. Okay, now that's been assembled, who is actually responsible for that data and who can confirm that data as well, so that we say this is not just a PDF, but it's been one that's been attested or notarized by the county clerk and an attorney. So we have this step-by-step process where we look for the data, so like a template for the data, then confirm the state of the data. And then one thing that's really cool, and this is really why the industry hasn't been able to do it before, because historically blockchain wasn't present, and then it also wasn't fully understood. Now we know we can take these documents and we can give them a digital fingerprint. The technical term is a hash, a cryptographic hash. So we're using cryptography to say this document at this point of time is validated. Now, what's cool about blockchains is that they're immutable. So 10 years from now, that validation still stands. I can still look back at that document and say, Here's who signed off on it. Here's what was in that document and the data points extracted from that. Here's where the data went. And I don't have to worry about, is this the right version? Was this manipulated along the way? Who signed off on it? Was Cushman & Wakefield really here? Has this been updated at any point? And what changed between that? So the presence of blockchain, and the other thing is, if you know about private markets and private real estate, they're opaque and they're a mess. And you're basically trusting that real estate owners or asset managers who, aside from getting sued, are under no obligation to properly report, you're trusting them to bring forward data, and then everyone's going to make decisions off that data. It's not a scalable or successful system, and that's why private real estate is private real estate, and it's not public equities. And so when you say, sure, here's my documentation, I'm a private real estate developer, I give you my documentation, and it's been cryptographically signed off on by these parties, now you can trust me as a developer.
Like I said, I love learning about new topics, and I've always been kind of on the periphery of this topic. ESG, is that now a component of your work, or the environmental, social, and governance? Is that a part of your methodology of tracking and data for property management companies?
It is, in a couple different ways. So first, in addition to helping real estate developers capture data, verify data, we also want them to be able to interact with it. And so I'm a huge proponent of digital twins. 2D data is great, but just putting a CAD file in a data room is not very useful. I want to be able to explore that property. And I want to be able to look at my different components, click on them, and understand what the warranty is, the manufacturer, and all that good stuff. What's interesting about digital twins is how you can connect outside hardware to the digital twin. So it's not just a picture of the property, but it's actually a virtual state of the property. So I'm seeing on my computer, how are we performing in terms of energy consumption? What's my carbon output? What's the traffic on this floor? How's the structure holding up based off of these load-bearing sensors? Focusing on the environmental piece, right there, energy consumption is key. And so being able to say we have this live feed of how well the property is performing is very useful. You can also tie it back to the data verification, because greenwashing has been a critical issue, or just not having updated numbers on the books. And so you might think that you're LEED Platinum based off of outdated information, and you're receiving these numbers, you're acquiring a property, and you find out that's not truly the case. That would be a detriment to a future owner. So if you can say, here's our certification, here's the inspector, here's all the maintenance on the components, and then hand that over in a verified state, you build a lot of trust in that future owner, and then they can fall back on that. They don't have to reinvent it for themselves. In fact, they could hold on to that. It doesn't matter that they did not produce the data themselves, because it was verified and trusted when it was handed to them. They could continue that going forward. And then I also get into the smart city conversation quite often. And I don't really want to say like capital S, smart, capital C cities, where it's now this idea that people get in their head that, World Economic Forum, 15-minute cities, that type of stuff. To me, it's more of a spectrum. You have dumb cities, and then you have smarter cities. Being biophilic, better urban planning, attractive buildings, good clean air, clean water, all those types of things I think should be part of our built environment. You should always be thinking about the end user of the built environment, which is us. We're humans, we're people, we use it. So why are we not designing things that are in our best interest? That's what I think about when I talk about smarter cities. It ties back to the data and the development, because those decisions, they do have outcomes, but the question is whether or not there's accountability for the outcome.
You mentioned data points several times. Love it. Can you give me a handful of examples? You kind of mentioned some, but where's this data coming from?
So the data is being generated or originated from many different areas. It could be design software. So this could be pre-construction, architects, engineers. We're designing the building. We've got all sorts of data about how it was supposed to be built. And then as you're on the job site, you might have data about how it's actually being built. And this could be in the form of scans or paperwork or change reports, all of these details. That's more structural, architectural, like AECO data. You could expand beyond that, and everything's connected, right? We have to be systems thinkers here. So what does that impact? Well, that would impact appraisal data and inspection, as well as future valuation. You have code, compliance, permits, that's all data as well. Really, at the end of the day, everything becomes data. Even people are data. who was responsible for this? What was their certification? That's a data point
Yeah.
that you definitely want to keep
Can
track
you
of.
pull even like AI video feeds, people
Yes.
counting?
Yeah, so that would be unstructured data. So you're recording maybe a job site, tracking the progress virtually. Now the video itself is video format. The question is, what information can we extract from that? And that's when you'd say, this is here today, that wasn't here yesterday. That's a data point. That tells us that we're 1% closer to completion. And then you structure that and you say, okay, well, where does that 1% greater completion actually impact something? Maybe it's progress reporting or milestones, or looking at our timelines and determining how much interest we're going to be paying on our loan. You want to make all that information useful, because just watching a video of the site being developed on the sidelines, it isn't super helpful if you're not getting something out of it. That sounds more like a YouTube video that I might click on and watch a time lapse of it being developed.
Mhm,
I want to
mhm.
structure that data into something useful that I can actually put it in rows and columns. Monday, 50% done. Tuesday, 51% done. Okay, that right there tells me we're on schedule.
Right. Are you at a point where you could take all this data you're collecting and have some kind of LLM where someone could just type in a sentence of, hey, is this a good investment? Is this building a good investment? Or what's the health status of this building just based off all the data collected? Are we at that point yet?
I think we're pretty darn close. So you can easily integrate an LLM into a large data set, and it could even be a private LLM. So it's not like it's feeding into OpenAI, and ask it questions about the data. A lot of the times, well, as of right now in the industry, there has not been robust training on these data sets. So the LLM might not know how to produce a response because it doesn't fully understand the
Has been
data,
trained.
right, to turn it into information. So that's number one. We do have to advance on that a little bit more. And we as an industry, as of right now, we don't have any LLMs in our platform, but it would be a lower the barrier to entry substantially if you could just ask about the property and the property tells you what's going on. And I could say, what's going wrong? And it'll say, well, this hasn't been maintained. And I would actually like to accredit Paul Doherty. I call him the godfather of smart cities. I gave him that title, though. I don't know if he is, but he ought to be. He's a brilliant gentleman. He was the founder of Revit, actually, and then sold it to Autodesk. He and some colleagues had developed this solution where the property can, just as I imitated, tell you what's going on. I don't know what company was behind that and what they're doing now, but they had all sorts of personalities for these properties, and they would indicate, the property would say, I'm unwell. There's an issue on floor number 5. This component's breaking and it could become a critical failure if we don't do something about it. And they would give some personalities to it, because if you think about it, buildings are just an extension of people. We make them, we use them, we live in them. There's different architecture and style. They might as well have their own personalities. So they would give like university buildings a scholarly voice, sort of Oxford, or
Yeah.
maybe something in an urban center, a little bit more excited and hip, the way that it communicates.
That's funny you say that. As you were saying, I was thinking about, when you go over to Europe and you're walking through a, 500-year-old castle or something. I mean, buildings do give off a vibe. They give you, there's a personality. And then you go to a state-of-the-art, brand new, high-tech, smart building. You feel the difference. It speaks to you differently. You go to, an old building is, 50 years old and it has a dank smell, it's the mildews in the carpet, or a hotel that you're like, yeah, I don't think I'll be staying here tonight. But that's interesting, an interesting thought. And especially when collecting the data. I'm a big advocate of that. I tell people all the time, AI needs data,
Mhm.
and you're collecting data, which kind of leads my next question that just kind of popped in my head. I mean, what's the adoption rate of executives in your space to make this transition, this digital transformation, if you would, to go from rolled up blueprints and paper data and into the world you're talking about? Are we halfway there? Is it still a long way to go? Or what's your take on that?
I don't know if there's an exact figure for the industry, because you have to define what good adoption is, and that's changing. And we're playing a part in
Point there.
changing that. And I'm also part of other organizations, Fibri being one. We just did a workshop between Fibri, UCL, KPMG, talking about data standards, data interoperability. And those conversations weren't being held maybe 5, 10 years ago. The ideas were there, but nobody was talking about it because we were still trying to digitize in the first place. Now people have taken at least one step forward, and we can say, great, you've digitized, but it's no longer good enough. Not that we're moving the goalpost, but you learn from bits of adoption what works and what doesn't. So is there an exact number for how many people are doing this correctly or what true adoption? I don't know if I have that data yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Even
In your
for
experience,
like,
did you feel like is it 50-50? Like 3 out of 4 times you talk to a new organization
well,
and they're like embracing it versus are
there's
you
a lot of variables in the
you have to educate
conversation.
you have to educate them too, I imagine,
Yeah,
right?
certainly. Whether
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
inbounds or outbounds, that plays a key role. I meet a lot of folks at prop tech events. So naturally, they're inclined to be open to new technology.
yeah.
Versus if
That's
I
fair.
was finding off the grid real estate developers in a rural area going up to their door, knocking on it, and pitching
Yeah,
this technology,
it's
it'd be
relative. Yeah,
totally different. So
yeah,
I have to say that any numbers I have would be biased. I would say that adoption rates are certainly accelerating, and I think we're on the right path. But then you could also make more sweeping generalizations. You could say, well, the average age in real estate tends to be higher,
yeah,
and those
yeah.
people are more likely to use methods that they already used for the past 20 years and continue that. But then you say, well, there's a transfer of ownership and a transfer of responsibility to younger generations who think differently. So there's a lot of things that are going to be impacting that. Certainly, this is not going to happen overnight. I've already planned, I will probably have to work on this for the next 10 to 20 years to encourage adoptions, to encourage standards and frameworks so that we're all playing by the same rules. Going back to the verification, now blockchain is sort of, it works around this. And that's why blockchain is such a good solution. So if I developed my own in-house verification and I called it the Matthew Schneider score, and then I said, look, Chris, here's a document. It's been Matthew Schneider score verified. You'd say, I don't know what your tech stack
What does
is. I
that
don't really
mean?
know who you
Yeah,
are. What does that mean exactly? Blockchains are universal. Blockchains are
that's right.
institutionally adopted. So I can say this has been blockchain verified. And that already gives us common ground where it doesn't matter if it's 10 years ago or now. It doesn't matter if it's the US or the UK, or if you really trust me or not. If it's been blockchain verified, that tells you something. So that's common ground. Then the file types or how we structure the data, should it be on the left side or the right side, or should the folders be labeled like this? How do you name the files? ISO 90 plays a big role in that. So there's all sorts of conversations around how should we be on the same playing rules. And then think about capital markets. So properties are already apples to oranges, and how they're appraised and how you use comparables, if they even exist. It's very one-off instances. And so people are also saying, and we're helping to spearhead this initiative, how do we have more standardized reporting, valuation, access to property data? How can we make sure that it's apples to apples now? Because then you can actually move money in and out of these deals, or say this property's worth a similar amount to the other one. Like that conversation doesn't happen when I'm comparing Apple stock and Tesla stock. I know how they've been underwritten. That discrepancy does happen though with real estate, and that's why it moves so slow. So that's sort of a different conversation, but that's just
Yeah.
one of the things where we're trying to, again, not just encourage digitization and adoption, but going about it the right way and something that can serve for the next multiple decades.
So digitizing in the short term has a lot of operational efficiencies and effectiveness. It helps them, save money. But long term, if they're looking to sell the property, obviously they got a Carfax for the building. Is that a simple way of putting it? I mean, is there like kind of two benefits to working with a company like yours?
Yeah, many robust benefits. And that's why if this was a sales call, I would be asking you, Chris, what's on your mind? What are you trying to accomplish? Oh, you're trying to refinance? That's going to change how we go about this. You're holding on to this for the next 10 years. You're certainly looking to optimize your operations and, maybe scale your portfolio, not turn over what you already have. So yes, short-term benefits, long-term benefits. Short-term, definitely efficiency amongst operations. You can reduce miscommunication, rework, coming over the same information because we're on the same page. We're looking at it in the same place. We have to put an end to, Chris, can you WhatsApp me this document? Is this version 1.3 or 1.4? I got it from someone else over email. What file does the county have? What did you guys, that's a big issue. There's a lot of liability that's baked into that. So having a single source of truth is going to remove a lot of that. And then it can certainly attract capital because you're building confidence within your investors and lenders. Long-term effects, data actually accrues value. And this is why I keep saying, when you have a data point, if you verify it, you want to be able to use it 10 years from now. It ages like fine wine. Data is incredible like that. Most data, if I can't trust it, it's useless as soon as it's a week old because something could change.
Wow.
So
You're
if
really making a good case, by the way, for smart buildings and what you're doing, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, even if you're short term, you're going to be more efficient and effective, but long term, it's an asset. You're going to have all the data, everything you've done to it, all the improvements, the, different inspections, and that makes a strong case
yeah,
for
and
because
that
I
data
sell a
can
lot
be
of smart building technology.
relied
I'm
upon.
really leaning on what's it going to do for you today. I've not talked much about what's it going to do for you in the future.
Yeah, yeah. And if I were to pinpoint the long-term effect, it's value. Because the data is appreciating, that's going to be added on top of the property itself. The property has its material and functional value, like tenancy, but it also has this data artifact. And the further back you can trace that data, the more that value has been able to compound or appreciate. And then that's applied to the property. Think about it. If I have a property with 1 year historical data, I know what maintenance was performed last year. If I have 10 years, I know all the maintenance that's performed. 15 years. So it just grows and grows, and I can see how the property has taken shape. Because eventually the roosters, what do they say? The chickens come home to roost, or is it the
Yeah,
roosters? But
somebody comes home to roost.
yeah, it comes full circle.
Let me ask you, so before built your company building and companies like it, everything was in a log, everything was on paper, right? Is that how it was kept up with? To your
In
point, I
large
mean, so
part.
yeah, if you had water damage or a fire or moving buildings or moving rooms around, stuff surely got lost, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of data that there's gaps in the data set. Going back to there's no integrity or continuity. This could be a big problem, especially multi-million-dollar investments. So, yeah, just I want to wrap this up in terms of this part of the conversation. Major shifts, is there any major trends happening? Is it happening just in the last 5 years or recently of, in the building facilities industry? Is any major shifts in terms of management and tracking all this information?
Well, you're seeing new platforms to track, so new software, all sorts of new hardware. There's always new stuff coming out for construction sites, as well as an as-built environment to look at health and performance, then digital twins or virtual modeling of those properties so that we can look at what we have. The real magic is how all of this blends together. It's the synergy between construction site data and our plans, as well as what we have currently, maybe looking at the differences and then understanding what went wrong, what could go wrong. Beyond that, I think that tokenization is a word that's going to be in a lot of lexicons. Here, financial institutions or institutional developers and investors talking about this. Really what they're talking about is unlocking value in this real estate. That's what they want to accomplish. However, doing that, if we understand the issues with private real estate, that we don't have the information, we have trust issues, there's no mandate for ongoing reporting or certain changes, cannot necessarily rely on it as a financial product. It has financial value, but is it a financial product, something that I can invest into, something that I can trade? Maybe not. And so you're going to see a lot of folks on the capital markets and banking side have stricter expectations for real estate developers and property managers because they want to know what's going on so that they can financialize real estate further. So you're definitely going to see some change on the ground as a ripple effect because money calls the shots. If you can't get a loan for this property, or if you can't find a future buyer, or you're being heavily discounted, that's a penalty for not maybe having robust data architecture or the right software and hardware in place. So that's their decisions are going to have upstream impact, and it's going to change the way that we build and operate.
You know, as you were talking too, I thought about another building catastrophe. You may remember years ago in Miami, a condo that
Hmm.
had the pool on the roof and part of it collapsed. I remember them talking in the news about the condo association was, debating on budget to come in and fix some cracks, but no one did anything. I think some people died in that. I mean, obviously, they had to demolish the whole thing. Would that situation potentially been avoided had they used a service like yours?
So the Surfside condo collapse, and there was a similar situation, the Grenfell fire or Grenfell Tower in the UK, which inspired the golden thread methodology, which is you need information to like live alongside the building, like a thread unraveling, if you think about a spool of thread at one point in time, and then it grows in length. In both of these situations, you can look back at the initial properties and realize that there was some code violations. So that's a huge issue. Then there was neglect and failure to repair, to report on that, to make any sort of decisions. And some of that may have been known. I have to look at the lawsuits again because there were considerable lawsuits. Who do we hold accountable? When many people die and when there's billions of dollars of loss, someone has to be held accountable. But do the current owners know about past issues? That's sort of the issue here, and what we're trying to prevent going forward, that there is some sort of transparency, because even if you think you know everything about the property, you don't know what you don't know. And you also don't know if what you know is true, right? There's just many trust issues baked into these properties, and you don't necessarily need a total disaster like that in order to have a solution like this. There's still smaller scale penalties, whether it's insurance cost or the property's underwater and people lose their jobs, you go out of business, you're filing bankruptcy. Those are big issues too. And then you're kind of blacklisted. You're not going to be raising capital for a new development firm if they look at what you did in the past and you realize they're acquiring properties that they can't properly screen. Even if it's not your fault, you inherit the fallout from that.
Yeah, I wonder if the architecture firm that designed that building, 50 years ago or 40 years ago, whatever it was, I mean, yeah, it may not have been their fault because they factored in some reasonable maintenance. If that wasn't done, it's not their fault.
Well, right. And their plans could say you have to use this type of rebar or this number within the concrete, and then the contractor does not do that.
That's
And
right.
does the contract tell anyone? And what if we look back at the supply chain, what materials were ordered? Maybe the contractor received faulty materials. Being able to track all of this and heavily document our properties prevents massive issues, and it also instills value and confidence in future owners because they know that they're not inheriting risk.
So is it fair to say that like a new build situation would be an ideal property for what we've been talking about versus it's something that's 40 years old? Because two different situations. A new build, you're going to have all the invoices, who did what kind of thing. And then, the 40-year-old property, who knows? I mean, it's all on paper if it even exists.
Potentially, we would like to assume that new properties have not lost as much information as old properties. That's most likely true. It's not always true.
New build construction, even like
Right.
they're clearing the ground. I mean, you're literally
Sure, right.
ground
So
level.
if you implement the ideas from the very beginning and do things right, so that before anything's gone wrong or
Yeah,
gotten
the
lost,
permits,
yes,
the soil
absolutely.
samples, environmental impact.
Right. That's a great place to have BIM and planning tools in place. Like, I'm a huge advocate for building information modeling because you're going to be capturing that data, hopefully storing it correctly, maybe using Kobe on handover, and then looking at what does the property look like now that it's been developed? Are there any changes? What can we confirm is actually there? So yes, certainly. So new developments, great for this. You can't really have a digital twin of a new development, but you can have a data room or data infrastructure, data plan for new builds. And then as built, you could have the data layer plus the digital twin.
So where are we going? What's the next 3 to 5 years looks like in this building industry? Are we going to get to the point where we have LLMs? I mean, what do you think's next that hasn't shown up yet?
That hasn't shown up yet. Well, since you mentioned the LLMs, I think that's coming. You're going to see these LLMs essentially playing the roles of like fractional advisors, fractional consultants for a particular trade or role. They will not be center point. You're still going to have senior roles because someone has to take responsibility. These are licensed, regulated industries. You can't just say AI designed it. I used generative AI for the architecture and engineering. I don't know what happens next. Maybe it collapses, but you guys can't look at me. Look at the model I used. That doesn't happen. So you're still going to have people who are making decisions, calling the shots. They're going to be influenced by AI, ML, LLMs, generative. And that's going to have all sorts of new efficiencies. You're going to move faster. You're going to be able to make decisions, save time. you still need a strong data foundation. I think that, so I know some things going on in the industry. I'm not at luxury to announce them. They're going to be announced very soon. There's some acquisitions coming, and I know what these companies want to accomplish. A lot of it is based around blockchain. So you're going to see, actually, I don't know if you're going to see it, but it's going to be there.
It's going to
Blockchain is,
impact.
yeah, blockchain is going to be all throughout the property life cycle. And it's going to be used as that digital fingerprint, whether you're worrying about the sale of properties, future litigation, or insurance, whatever it is, there should be fewer disputes because that digital fingerprint is present, even if you didn't know it was.
Well, obviously 6 years ago when everyone had to go work at home, and there were just God, millions and millions of square foot of commercial space just empty. What's your take on this? Is the commercial real estate recovering from that? I mean, there's been all these reports of companies. Hey, you got to come work from the office, if not 5 days a week, at least 3 days a week. So I feel like people are returning to work. There's still a lot of people working remotely, but imagine that really had to hurt the commercial real estate business of all well, businesses that were paying big money, insurance, utilities, taxes, space that was not being utilized. What's your take on that? Do you pop up in your conversations much about, maybe they have these a 500 seat building that's only 200 people in it now, and they're trying to figure out how to sublease it or make money on it?
Yes and no. So I use commercial real estate as an umbrella term, all inclusive for industrial, multifamily residential, office. But that being said, the crisis that you're seeing in commercial real estate is still one of data and transparency, because the cycles at which data was refreshed and reported and that the debt is maturing were stagnated. And this is actually very similar to the '08 crisis, where numbers being updated on internal books were not being reflected with intermediaries. And so you have this delay between what's the actual performance of the underlying and what's the reporting on that. Therefore, what's the price? And this is why you saw, hey, price is not changing, risk ratings are not changing, but we're pretty sure that the mortgage industry is crumpling. What's going on here? And then it collapses. And so while I don't think we're going to see that same scale in commercial real estate, and some of it's already happened, some of it's cooling off, and they're trying to mitigate the fallout by sending people back to offices and like, let's continue the cycle. Let's make sure we're paying our leases here. There's still this issue that the underlying performance is not being updated or not reflected in the asset's price and the books and the intermediaries. And so one way that you get around that is you have to change the appraisal process, how we value the properties, and not just a trailing NAV. So saying based off of our internal calculations of the last quarter, we think the property's worth this, but what we think actually has no bearing on what it's truly worth, because you need a third-party mark. So this is where we are trying to spearhead a fractional appraisal model. And the idea is you could get a third-party mark more often if they could go in and they don't have to like rebuild the data from scratch. They could look at what's changed, what's verified to not have changed, which again, you need that blockchain for that, to say 90% of the data is the same. Here's the 10% we need to look at. Now that we've looked at it and it's taken us 1 week instead of months, done. Here's the mark on the property. Here's the change. And that could be for better or for worse, because maybe there's greater vacancy in the property, and that's not necessarily something that any property would want to reflect. But at the same time, it stops the accumulation of non-reporting that would lead to massive crises where we say, oh, now 12 months have gone by and I didn't tell anyone that every month a tenant was moving out. And now this is 12 times worse than it would have been back then. So, and not just worse for the property owner, but worse for the creditors. And when you put banks and private lenders in jeopardy, there's considerable fallout because people are parking money there. So there's all sorts of considerations and better transparency and then better ratings and reporting that will come out of that. So it's a very relevant topic, and it just comes back to data, price, capital markets.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's very interesting. Gosh, great conversation. Did we just scratch the surface, or is there a lot more to talk about, you think? Should we do a part 2 one day?
Well, we could probably talk about more hardware and less market structure, because
Right.
that's where a lot of it leads to. But the decisions that you make when you build and manage a property have outside effects. there's other people affected, and a lot of it comes back to money. So that's why I do try to tie those together and then look at the bigger picture too. Real estate wants to participate in global investment. And so if we can make real estate more transparent, less risky, more liquid, then capital is going to go into it. Well, for real estate developers, that's a great gig. More money to build more things. And what are we building? Skylines, where we live, civilization, right? So I think that it actually plays a pretty big essential role. This is sort of my Elon Musk, we have to get humanity to another planet feel, where I say, you start preparing the data, greater transparency, less risk, more investment, bigger, better cities. That sounds good for civilization. So that's my
Yeah, it don't
role in it.
sound bad. I guess there's one hardware question. I mean, going back to IoT sensors and smart building technology, what do you see the most as making the biggest difference? I mean, and I ask that because I mean, there's dozens of different technologies that I represent, talk about with different property companies, whatnot, and some of them really stick, and other ones are like, I can do without that. I mean, is there anything that from your observation is like kind of like table stakes you really should have it if you're running a commercial high rise professional office building or even a multi dwelling unit? I mean, doesn't really matter the type. Is there just any kind of IoT technology that in your mind really should be just kind of a non negotiable, should be there?
I don't know if this would be cliche because I don't know what answers your other guests gave, but I would say energy consumption is very important to monitor. You could extend that to the health and performance of the components themselves. How are we
Preventive
taking?
maintenance.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. But energy, because it has such a measurable impact on the bottom line of a
Mm,
property, and it also has environmental consequence. So it's something that we need to keep an eye on, and it's the easiest to manage. It's not rocket science to flip the lights off. That's what you need. You just need to know that the lights have to be off.
right,
Like if
right.
if we say this floor of the 72 buildings or half these floors are being heated and the lights are on, and nobody's there this week. Well, let's see if we can find a better way to go about that. And then people are weaving in AI and saying it knows when people are using it and it'll start to preheat the rooms or whatever. So that's what I think is pretty optimistic. Others could have different opinions, but
Have you heard of a company called Abundant IoT?
I have not.
I'll send you the link, and I'm meeting with them tomorrow. Actually, I'm doing an event in Plano, Texas. Flying, I'm in Atlanta, going to Texas tomorrow. I always love to go to Texas. Fun state to visit. But yeah, it's there. They also have something called, it's called Energy IoT. He's going to love your answer because he agrees with you, and I agree with you. I think you're right. That's the one thing every business and building is using pretty much without fail is electricity. I mean,
Hmm.
it's hard to do anything, even if it's solar panel or wind power. There is electricity and energy, and how's it being monitored? How are you preventing waste? If not only energy, but water. Water and
That
natural
too.
gas. I mean, any utility can be monitored. And it's funny. I was even talking to him about like data centers. Data centers use a lot of water to cool all these components. And there's air bubbles in the water, which affects the meter, which affects how much you're paying for your water. So there's devices that could take all the air out of the water before it goes through the meter. So you're literally only paying for pure water and not 98% water. The things that, you just like, I never thought of that.
That's a great point. In the age of data centers and artificial intelligence, our relationship, the human relationship and the building relationship with energy is changing. It's becoming very precious, and it could become expensive, but then also how we produce it as well, what our utilities are doing, how they're supplying that. It's critical. We have to keep track of that and stay on top of that. Arguably one of the US's weaker points. Our infrastructure is little outdated and not so competitive.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to a company that actually builds data centers in Canada, and they were telling me like some of this, they were naming some cities. They said, we can't build in that city because the grid can't support us.
Hmm.
His phrase was, they're out of energy. They're out. I'm like, how do you run
Hmm.
out of energy? He's like, no, we can't build there because it's going to shut, the grid will fail if we build a data center there. And yeah, where data centers are being built now is actually, being determined by the availability of, energy. And a lot of a lot of them are, generating their own energy. And that's pretty fascinating. But gosh, is there anything we haven't hit on, Matthew, or anything you want to leave us with? Any kind of last words as we wrap up?
Well, This has been a fantastic conversation. I encourage people to go back and listen to each of the different things because we unpacked property management, construction practices, and then the effects on capital markets. Key points. I mean, I want people to keep an eye out for some of those new technologies. I know that it can be a headache to try to study it at all. And there's a lot of noise. Finding the signal amongst the noise can be tricky nowadays. So I consider myself someone that you should listen to. And so if you check out any of the podcasts that I've done, any of the research that we've put out, if you want to just strike up a one-on-one conversation with me, I'm here. I'm ready to help and move the industry forward. And then, I'm always looking to contribute to research either independently through my company or through some of the other research orgs that I'm with. If people want to bump heads, write papers, I just submitted a paper to ITRIP on some of the topics that we talked about today. So that's sort of my call to action. Let's figure out how we can use our brains to make the world a better place.
I love that, Matthew. And what's the name of your podcast again?
It's called Code and Concrete. It's available on all platforms.
Code and Concrete. I'll put a link in the show notes. Check out the show notes. Of course, I'll have more information to learn more about Matthew and his company. Matthew, I agree with you. I really enjoyed this. It's a different area of the business that I, get to talk about every day. I'm usually more in the bytes and bits and technology of it, but I think that's what makes the difference with a modern day technologist is how that impacts business. They really go hand in hand. It's an investment to buy technology, and it has to be an ROI. Has to make life better. And it needs to add value. You don't buy it just for the sake of buying it. People are looking for an ROI all the time, and as they should be. So again, thanks for making time for us today, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Excellent. And there you go, folks. Another episode of The Wireless Way. As always, if you heard something that resonated, made you think about a client or a colleague or a friend, please share this episode with them and like and subscribe, follow. I really appreciate that. And if you have any suggestions or feedback, you can contact me at my website at thewirelessway.net, thewirelessway.net. So check us out. And until then, I'll see you next time on The Wireless Way.